Welcome to the Veteran Spouse Network podcast, brought to you in collaboration with Coming Home Well. I'm your host, Hannah O'Brien, both a veteran spouse and the program manager for the Veteran Spouse Network. On each episode of our show, I will host different guests to learn more about the stories, unmet needs, and resources available to our military and veteran families. We're the show that's making space for your stories, so that here you know you're never alone. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the very first episode of the Veteran Spouse Network podcast. I'm your host, Hannah O'Brien, and I'm super excited to have y'all joining us as we start this podcast to really bring a voice and share the stories of our military and veteran families. I thought for this first episode, it would be appropriate to really introduce myself and share my story as a veteran spouse. And so I hope you guys are excited to learn a bit about me and join me as I tell my story. So quick and dirty, who am I? I am the spouse of a Marine Corps veteran. I am the mother to a beautiful 6-month-old baby girl. I am a social worker, and I am the program manager for the Veteran Spouse Network. So something I think that's interesting when I say I'm a veteran spouse is I met my husband after he had already left the military, after he had left the Marines. And so I always say that, I was not a military spouse. I did not have that experience. And I did have the unique experience of meeting this Marine veteran and really knowing nothing about this community, or next to nothing. I grew up here in Austin, Texas. I was really close to my family, or I am really close to my family. And my grandfather on my dad's side did serve in the military, but he died when I was relatively young. And as far as I could tell from stories, he didn't really tell that many stories about his service. There wasn't that much known about it. So other than just knowing that was a thing that he did, I didn't really have an understanding of what that meant. And beyond him, really no one else in my life had served. And so I was pretty naive to what this population went through, both on the active duty side and then, of course, on the veteran side. And so I actually kind of had my first foray into this community a little bit before I met my husband. I had started dating somebody who was an Army veteran, and he was pretty plugged into the veteran community. And so I started interacting a lot more with other veterans, meeting them, learning a little bit more about their service, that culture, and the uniqueness of that culture. So I started to get a foray into that, but it was still what I would say pretty surface level. I still really didn't have an in-depth understanding. And I was really young too, so I wasn't as confident and outgoing in terms of asking questions, and I didn't want to say the wrong thing or, pretend to know something about something I really didn't know about. So I'd say it was a toe into the pool, but very surface level stuff that I was starting to know about this community. And a couple years after that, I met my husband, and he was really different than the other veterans I had met in a lot of ways. The day that we met, within hours of knowing him, I knew this was a forever person. In the moment, I didn't know exactly, if he was my forever person, but I knew he was a forever person in terms of he was going to be in my life forever. This was an important person. He was a Marine, and at that point I hadn't interacted with very many Marines, and it was a clear, heavy part of his identity. And so I got to learn a lot about that, and still do. But it was more like military veteran culture he wore on his sleeve. And it was clear it was a strong part of his identity. And then also he was a veteran living with PTSD and was somewhat open about it, in the sense that that was actually something he told me the day I met him. we were talking, and he was opening up and talking about how his last relationship had ended, and how it had a lot to do with his PTSD and his partner not really understanding, but it was a big factor in the end of their relationship. When I met my husband, I was in the process of getting my master's in social work. So I had an understanding of PTSD from kind of that more educational clinical standpoint, but I didn't know anyone who had it, and I didn't know anyone who like talked about it openly. And so that really was striking to me, that he kind of had this identity, he wore it on his sleeve, this veteran culture, this Marine culture. He cared about his service, he was proud of his service, and he had PTSD, and he wasn't, at least to me, afraid to talk about it. And so that really stuck with me. Fast forward, by the end of that first day of meeting, it did become pretty clear that we were going to enter into a relationship. And as we began our relationship, I just decided I was going to be more curious, both personally and professionally. So personally, I just kind of asked Cody tons of questions about his service. If I thought of something and I was curious about something, I asked him about it. And what was interesting about that was it kind of really caught him off guard, in the sense that he kind of pretty plainly said, like, wow, no one has really asked me about anything like this. No one's really asked me about my service or seemed to care about my service. And even today, he still says that no one really asks me about this. And it's such a huge part of my life, huge part of my identity. And so here I was, this person who was curious and caring and wanting to know about that piece of his life and identity. And then professionally, when I had entered social work school, I was really interested in the incarcerated population, the homeless population. And so that could have had really been my focus. And I really just kind of shifted, and I decided to learn more about the military and veteran population. And honestly, what really struck me was how it's a small percentage of the population who serve, of course, but they're very public. And so I felt, how did I know nothing? How did I know nothing about this population? And it just didn't feel right. And so I really pinpointed, okay, this is going to be my professional population of interest. And so I really dove in. And things were great. As we started our relationship, it just felt like it fit. It was as close to perfect as it possibly could be. And it was just amazing for 3 months. Dun, dun, dun. 3 months into our relationship, we hit a rough patch, and it totally caught me by surprise. I had no idea what was happening. All of a sudden, he just was so distant and so drastically pulling away. And I just really didn't know what was going on. And it was so confusing and painful as a result, because while he was pulling away, I was trying to kind of run after him and find out what was going on and what did I do? What can I do? And he just wasn't able to talk to me about what was going on. And so I felt really lost and confused. Here, fast forward to insight that I didn't have then. Took a long time for him to be willing to open up to me about what was actually going on. But 3 months into our relationship was the month of November, and November was an anniversary for him. And if you're listening to this and you're not a part of the military community, you might not know what that means. If you are, you probably do. It's something, Cody says they often refer to as their own personal D-Day. And so in his case, it was an incident that resulted in an injury that led to his eventual separation, his medical separation from the Marines, and ended the lives of several of those in his unit. And so November was rough. That was a hard month for him, and he wasn't handling that anniversary well. And as I talk about things from Cody's perspective, I do want to clarify, we've had conversations about what was going on for him and what was okay to share with you all. Because I didn't want to make assumptions, right? And so these insights are insights he's throughout our relationship been able and willing and lovingly, been able to give to me to understand kind of what was happening and understand what he was going through. And so when this anniversary happened, he'd avoided, and he would try and tell himself that he was dealing fine, and he would cope with a lot of alcohol. And I didn't know it was an anniversary. I didn't know about that day. So when this happened, I saw that he was clearly hurting. Something was happening, but he wouldn't open up to me about it. And in fact, would push me further and further away every time I tried to get closer about it. And while he was pushing me away, he also wouldn't fully cut me loose. And so that was a difficult time and painful. And we would go through this cycle frequently, about every 3 to 4 months, where he would what kind of come to coin the term as like throwing bombs into our relationship. And again, we've since talked about this, and what he kind of said was going on for him was he would feel like he was getting attached, and he didn't want to get attached to anything. So he would take some sort of action to detach. And the truth is, it was trauma avoidance. So he'd be running from the trauma, whether it was the anniversary or something else. And he said, in running from that, he ran from anything and everything. And he also had relationship trauma. So, opening up to me, trusting me, getting close to me was difficult. And I didn't understand. What was going on. And part of me wanted to walk away, but also part of me felt very sure in my core that something bigger was at play, that something was happening to him, that this wasn't really about me. And so I didn't want to walk away. I felt very confident this was my forever. And I didn't want to walk away, and he would never fully cut me loose. And I wanted to understand. And it was really, really hard. And his perspective was that, he'd have kind of these sobering moments where he would kind of have this reality check with himself when he wasn't trying to pretend he was dealing and that everything was okay. When he would realize that I treated him differently than others had in his life. I didn't write him off. I didn't blow him off. I didn't dismiss him like he kind of felt everyone had. Past relationships, even feeling dismissed from the Marine Corps. He served 7 years, was medically separated, and he had wanted to go career. And he felt like he was just cut off. And so that there was that feeling of dismissal and that he expected. But in those sobering moments, he would realize I wasn't doing that. I was fighting. And so we'd figure it out. We'd have the blissful months. And then we'd go through the cycle again. He'd throw the bomb. I'd try to connect. We'd ultimately end up partying, at least somewhat, but we couldn't fully part. So we find ourselves back together. 3 months later, he'd throw the bomb again. And the issue was he wasn't addressing the root of his issues. So it just kept happening. But as it just kept happening, he just kept hurting me. And even having this feeling or even this awareness that I didn't think it really, really was about me and that something bigger was going on, that something was happening to him, it doesn't mean it was easy. It didn't mean it didn't hurt. It didn't mean I didn't doubt that frequently. And it really made the people who cared about me in my life not like him, not trust him, and not think he was good for me. And at the end of the day, I don't fault any of them for that. If I saw the same thing happening to someone I love, I can't say that I would be so understanding. So I got a lot of, why do you put up with this? Like, he clearly doesn't care about you like you think he does or you want him to too. And it made me feel so isolated because I truly felt like no one was trying to understand how I felt about it. They didn't understand that nuance, nor kind of want to understand the nuance of me trying to explain that something else was going on. It felt like, I'm guessing to them, it felt like I was making excuses for him. And that's how it felt a lot of times on my end. I felt like I was constantly trying to explain myself and my feelings and, try to get them to understand. And it did feel like I was constantly like justifying his actions or, what have you. And it was emotionally exhausting. And at the end of the day, like I was going for support, and instead I was like worse. It was only not getting support, but feeling this emotional exhaustion from trying to help them understand something that they weren't able to understand in order to support me in the way that I needed them to. And so what happened? Well, I stopped going to them for support. And I was incredibly isolated as a result. That was a problem. That was a problem. I was isolating, and I was isolating in my pain. And we did this. We went in this cycle for a couple of years. And finally, we were able to break this cycle in our relationship. And it took, honestly, doing individual work on both our parts. And the time we ended it, before we broke the cycle, I realized that I had not healed from the trauma of our relationship. We really tried to make it work. We did couples therapy. We really tried. And I realized I just hadn't healed. I wasn't going to be able to be in this relationship until I focused on healing. And he hadn't tried to address those root issues with why this cycle kept happening over and over again anyway. And so we both decided to, hey, we're going to part and we're going to focus on ourselves. And the other thing we did that I think really helped was we didn't try to cut each other out of our lives. We decided to be friends. We decided to work on ourselves, not try and force a relationship, and be friends and be in each other's lives. And simultaneously, as some things just, happen, that just, the stars align and certain things just happen for a reason. When we were in that period of our relationship, Cody was working out and tore his calf, and it ended up resulting in a serious blood clot. And so he, had a pretty serious injury, and that had to be dealt with, that he was on crutches. It was a lot of trying to, go to doctors, navigate all sorts of things. And he has told me that for him, it was really that happening and realizing, man, I need help, like literal, physical and emotional help. Like I need help to deal with what's happened to me. And I'm going to ask Hannah for it. And that was huge for him because he didn't want to ever have to need anything from anyone. And that was partially from those past relationship traumas of, people have let me down. It was also that Marine Corps spirit and mantras of self-sufficiency as strength, asking for help as weakness. And he'd grown up really depending on himself. And so asking for help was weakness. And he was able to, in that moment of understanding, okay, I really injured myself and I need help. And the person I trust to help me is Hannah, he said, really broke the cycle for him. That was him like letting me in. And so I helped him with logistical stuff. I went to the doctors with him, all this sort of stuff on that front. And I was there for him, and he saw that and felt that. And that just changed things for him. And since then, we've been on a great path. We've done a lot of work past that. It wasn't like that was the magic wand and, everything is great every day. No, we, just like any couple, work at it every day. But that was really him letting me in, and that transformed things for both of us. But I want to circle back as we finish up to talking about that feeling of isolation that I felt, not feeling like I could go to my tribe for support. And I have a tribe. I have family, so many, family members I am very close to. I have a core friend group, many of which I've known since I was 5 years old, that those are my ride or die. And I felt isolated. I felt like I couldn't go to any of these people. They didn't understand. I wasn't getting support. And that was a really challenging time for me. I was going through these challenges in my relationship, and I couldn't talk to anybody. And so at that time, I was getting my master's in social work. So I decided to turn to my professors and say, okay, well, I need to talk to people who are living this sort of life. So I went to them and I said, hey, where are support groups for loved ones of veterans, family members, spouses, what have you? Like, I need to go be with people who are going to understand this nuance or want to understand this nuance. And I asked several professors, and they said, as far as we know, that does not exist. And I even had one professor suggest that I go to Al-Anon. And I remember just being like, whoa, like, why is dating a veteran with PTSD synonymous to alcoholism? Like, what, I didn't mention anything about alcohol, and that hit me so hard. And like, wow, I thought I just was going to tap into this support and everything was going to be okay. And it doesn't exist. What do I do? And so fast forward, as I was preparing to graduate in 2017, I started my job hunt, and I was so grateful that where I ended up landing was at my alma mater. I took a job at the School of Social Work at UT, working as a program coordinator for a couples program, a veteran couples program. And then what at the time was the beginning of the Veteran Spouse Network. And I have been there for the last 6+ years and gotten to grow this program so much. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Veteran Spouse Network, we provide peer support, education, and information to military and veteran spouses and family members. And we do this through one-on-one peer support groups, educational seminars, etc. And I got to be a part of building this program, building this peer support. And I do not say this lightly. I often wonder and almost feel like I know that I don't know that my husband and I would be where we are today in a happy marriage with a beautiful baby daughter if it weren't for this job. And I say job because that's what got me here. But when I say job, I mean community. I mean this amazing community of military and veteran spouses and partners and family members. The community I had been longing for, the community that I knew at my core I was going to be able to walk in, and where I had faced questions or misunderstanding or felt that I had, or judgment, or felt that I had to constantly explain myself, that I wasn't going to have to do that with this group. They would just get it. And they do. And I feel so grateful that every day I get to create and foster programming that feeds this community, that gives back to spouses like me who are just looking for someone to tell them that they're not crazy, that they get what they're going through, that they're not alone. And that's the biggest thing we try to achieve in our programs. And that's the thing we hear the most often, is that our programming helps people understand that they're not alone. And so I was so excited to jump on this podcast because I just thought this is another way to connect. This is another way to share stories and help people feel less alone, and help people who may not be ready to approach a peer support group. That can be intimidating for some. But I hope it's not intimidating to sit here and listen to a podcast and listen to my story and listen to the stories of the guests I bring on in the coming months. And if one person listening today feels less alone because I shared my story, well, then that's it. Mission accomplished. I'm just so grateful for this spouse community and the strength of this community. And so I really appreciate everyone who's still listening at this point for, opening their hearts to hearing my story. And really, that's what we hope to achieve each month on our episodes, is to bring in other spouses, other family members to share their amazing stories, including challenges as well as their strengths, their resilience, their resourcefulness, because our military and veteran families are strong. And we're strong because of that bond and that support and that community. And that's what we want to foster here. And let's be honest, people aren't talking about spouses and family members enough. I mean, honestly, they're probably not talking about service members and veterans enough either, but we don't get talked about enough. Our stories are not at the forefront, and we want to change that here on this podcast. So each month I'll be bringing on different guests to share their stories, and I really hope that you join us. And I hope that you learn something, and I hope that you feel a part of this community. And again, I just thank you guys so much for listening to me, joining me, and hearing my story. And I hope to see you next month or sometime down the road. Thank you and enjoy. Thanks again for joining us on the Veteran Spouse Network podcast, brought to you in collaboration with Coming Home Well. We thank you for listening today and hope today's session left you feeling a little more connected or gave you some insight into the experiences of our military and veteran families. Don't forget to check us out at veteranspousenetwork.org to learn more about how our military and veteran families can receive the support they deserve.